Samuel was dead. Dead. And it was a pity the way he died. You see, Samuel's house burned, and Samuel, he went with it. But now that Samuel was dead, Samuel discovered that being dead wasn't anything like Samuel had been told being dead would be. Oh, no, now that Samuel was dead, why, he was traveling about in the world, and he could see everything that you can see and everything that I can see, although he was invisible to the likes of us. And he could see all kinds of other things as well. There were swooping things out there, swooping things, flying things, creeping things, crawling things. And those swooping, flying, creeping, crawling things were all swooping and flying and creeping and crawling around Samuel. And Samuel, he was having a horrible time being dead. Why, he was having to dodge those swooping and flying things and brush off those creeping and crawling things. And when all the things realized that Samuel could see them, they were excited, and they said, Samuel! Samuel, can you see us, Samuel? Samuel! Oh, Samuel, can you see us? If you can see us, Samuel, it means that you're dead. Did you know that you were dead, Samuel? That's right, Samuel, you're dead. You're going to be dead for a very long time, Samuel. You are dead. Oh, Samuel said, yes, I can see you. I can see you. Samuel was having a horrible time being dead. But at last, even the swooping, flying, creeping, crawling things began to take a little pity on Samuel. And they said, Samuel, if you're tired of looking at the likes of us, there's a way that you don't have to see us. That's right, Samuel. Yes, Samuel, there's a way that you don't have to see us. All you have to do, Samuel, is take yourself to the graveyard. To the graveyard, Samuel. That's right, Samuel. There you'll be eaten by the graveyard worm. Oh, that's right, Samuel. Eaten by the graveyard worm. Eaten by the graveyard worm, Samuel. Samuel, just take yourself to the graveyard, be eaten by the graveyard worm. You won't have to see us. That's right. That's how it works, Samuel. Samuel didn't much like the sound of that. But after a while, he got so tired of the swooping things, the flying things, the creeping things, and the crawling things that he took himself to the graveyard. Samuel stood at the entrance of the graveyard, and he could see it, the graveyard worm. It curled round and about the tombstones. And when the graveyard worm sensed Samuel's presence at the entrance, the graveyard worm turned its great head toward Samuel, and it began to make its way over toward Samuel. Samuel, come to be eaten by the graveyard worm. Have you, Samuel? Yes, please, get it over with. Samuel, we have a problem here. Samuel, you didn't bring me your body. Samuel, what am I supposed to eat? Samuel, where is your body? My body. I died in a fire, and my body, it burned in the fire, and, I suppose it's ashes. That's what I suppose happened to my body. Well, Samuel, I can be taken care of if you don't bring me your body. Go, Samuel, get the ashes. Samuel remembered where his house had been, and he remembered the general vicinity of where he had been at the time of the fire. And so he went there, and he gathered all of the ashes, and he brought the ashes back to the graveyard worm, and he said, Here are the ashes. Please, get it over with. And the graveyard worm inspected the ashes. Samuel, we have a problem here. Something's missing. An arm, my left arm. Oh, Samuel, oh, are you missing your left arm? Yes, I was. Many years before the fire. Well, I had an accident, and as a result of the accident, why, I lost my left arm. Yes, I was missing my left arm. Well, Samuel, I can't be taking care of you if you're not all here. Go, find the arm. Now, I told you Samuel was invisible to the likes of us. So he could go in and out of many places that you and I would never be able to go. And so he went in and out of all those many places, and he learned the location of his arm. He picked up the arm, he brought it back to the graveyard, and he dropped the arm on the ashes, and he said, there's the arm. Now, please, get it over with. The graveyard worm inspected the arm. Samuel, we have a problem here. Something's missing. Your thumbnail. Samuel, were you missing your left thumbnail? Yes, I was. Many years before the accident where I lost my arm. Why, my thumbnail, it was smashed, it turned dark, it fell off, it never grew back. Yes, I was missing my left thumbnail. Samuel, I can't be taken care of if you're not all here. Go, find your thumbnail. Now, folks, finding an arm is one thing, but finding a left thumbnail, I understand that Samuel is still out there, searching for his left thumbnail. And sometimes he sees a left thumbnail, and he thinks it's his, and he reaches for it. So if you should ever be just sitting around, minding your own business, and you happen to feel a tug on your left thumbnail, Oh, go ahead. Take your right hand, just give your left thumbnail a tug. Go ahead. Yeah. That way you know the feeling. If you should happen to feel that feeling, why, it could be that Samuel spotted your left thumbnail and thinks it's his. I understand that he is a kind soul, and all you have to do, and I would be quick about it, is put your left thumbnail inside your fingers, and then very quickly say, Samuel. Samuel, no, Samuel. That one's not yours. That one's mine, Samuel. You need to move on and keep looking. And I understand that Samuel is such a kind soul that he will indeed move on, and he does keep looking. Long ago, back when the Culbertsons who built this mansion still lived here, a gentleman was traveling in his buggy. He rode past the Culbertson mansion down Main Street. He headed for the corner of Main and Vincennes, and just as he reached the corner, why, his horses started to bolt, and he had to calm them. Whoa, he said, easy, easy. And he was so focused on calming his horses that it was not until they were settled that he noticed a young woman, obviously wealthy, for she wore elegant clothing. She was standing in the street beside his buggy. She held her hand out to him, and she said, "Please, sir, please, I know it isn't proper of me to ask, but please, sir, will you give me a ride to Louisville? I must go to Fourth. I need to return this beaded bag." And from the gaslight of the street lamp on the corner of Main and Vincennes, he could tell that in her hand she was holding a strikingly beautiful beaded bag. The top of it was green velvet with a green velvet drawstring. Below the green velvet was a band of burgundy beads, and then a wider band of white beads with blue and burgundy flowers. Below that, another band of burgundy beads, and from the bottom hung green beaded fringe. It was the sort of beaded bag that young women carried on social occasions at that time, and this was the most beautiful one he had ever seen. "Please, sir," she said, "take me to Louisville, take me to Fourth. I must return this beaded bag." She seemed so desperate that even though he knew it might cause a scandal, for in that day 2 young people of opposite gender were never to ride in a buggy together without a chaperone, he was so moved by her desperation that he helped her into the buggy. And then he offered her the buggy robe. She placed it over her lap, it fell over her skirts and down onto the floor of the buggy, and in that way he knew that she would be warm. Then he turned, drove across the Kentucky and Indiana Bridge and on into Louisville. And when they were on Fourth, outside an elegant home, she said, "Stop here, please." He got out of the buggy, took the reins from the horses, tied them to the hitching post, and then when he went back to help his passenger, she was gone. When he looked in the buggy, there was no sign of her. He thought, I didn't hear the buggy creak. It would have had to have creaked when she got out, and I didn't hear her footsteps running up the walk. And he was so concerned about her that he went to the door of the elegant home and he knocked, and the door was opened by a servant who said, "May I help you?" "Well, yes," he said, I brought a young woman here. She had a beaded bag. She said she needed to return it. That's my buggy there at the street." Oh, the servant's face took on a look of sadness and disappointment and other emotions that he could not quite decipher. "Oh, wait here," she said. And she went across the hall and into a room, and from the room he could hear the servant say, "Miss, I'm sorry, but another one has come." Then the servant returned to the door with a young woman who resembled his passenger, but who was obviously several years older. The young woman came to the door and she said, "Sir, I want to thank you for trying to bring my sister home." "Trying," he said. She was in my buggy, a young woman. I brought her here. That's my buggy." "She's dead, sir. She died a few years ago, but thank you. This is the anniversary of her death, and you're not the first. Thank you for trying to bring her home." "Oh, no," he said. I brought her home." The young woman said, "Sir, come into the parlor. Let me explain." And as they walked into the parlor, he saw that lying on a table there in the parlor was a beaded bag. It had green velvet at the top with a green velvet drawstring, then a band of burgundy beads, a band of white beads with blue and burgundy flowers, a band of burgundy beads, and from the bottom hung green beaded fringe. And he said, "Oh, that's the bag that she was carrying. That's the beaded bag. She did come in here then. She brought the bag." And the young woman said, "No, sir. You see, my sister was engaged to be married, and her fiancé was a distant relative of the Culbertsons. And so he was invited to a party at their home, and he invited my sister to accompany him. Oh, I was so jealous. The Culbertsons have such elegant parties, and I wanted to attend, but I was not invited. And it was such a special occasion that my sister wanted to borrow my new beaded bag. Well, I refused. I hadn't carried it on any social occasion yet, but she begged and she pleaded, and finally I relented. But I told her that she had to return my beaded bag in perfect condition or I would loathe her forever. Well, they attended the party accompanied by our aunt as their chaperone. And when the party ended and they were returning home, when they neared the corner of Main and Vincennes in New Albany, the horses of the carriage were startled. No one's exactly sure why, but there are those who think it may have been the passing train. You see, carriages had made their way across the Kentucky and Indiana Bridge since that summer, but trains had only started across that fall. And the horses, well, they were startled, and the carriage driver lost control of them, and the carriage, pulled by the horses, moved wildly, and the carriage tilted right into the side of a passing train. All aboard were killed. On the first anniversary of my sister's death, a gentleman came to our door as you have, trying to bring her home with the beaded bag. And on the second anniversary, it was the same. Well, I decided if I had a duplicate made, perhaps my sister would learn that I no longer needed the beaded bag. I had one, and her spirit could rest. But it's the third anniversary of her death, and here you are. But I thank you, sir. Thank you for trying to bring her home. Well, the gentleman was perplexed and bewildered. He simply could not accept what he had just heard, and he said, No, I brought your sister home. She was carrying that beaded bag, and she had the robe from my buggy with her. The woman stood up and she said, Sir, I have told you the truth. My sister is dead. Her name is Julia Wyatt. She's buried in our family plot in Cave Hill Cemetery. Sir, I thank you, but she is dead. Good evening. And the servant took the gentleman to the door. He walked back to his buggy, and he drove to his home. But he could not stop thinking about what he had heard. And a few days later, he went to Cave Hill Cemetery, and there he found the Wyatt family plot. And in the plot, he found the tombstone of Julia Wyatt. And lying on her grave, he found the lap robe from his buggy. A long time ago, there was a man who lived in a one-room cabin in the North Carolina woods. Now, that one room was his kitchen, his living room, and his bedroom, too. One morning, the man woke up in the bedroom part of his cabin, went over to the kitchen part of his cabin, but he couldn't find a single thing over there worth eating. Now, he knew what he had to do. He took his gun down from off the rack, he went outside, stood on his porch, and he called to his dogs, Uno, I know, Crumpety-Co, Calico, here dogs, here dogs. The dogs came barking and yelping out from underneath the porch where they slept at night. The man said, Well, dogs, we don't have a single thing in there worth eating. Today we're going to have to go do us some hunting. And so that man and his dogs hunted. Now, they hunted all day long. And when it was almost nightfall, the man said, Well, dogs, we didn't get anything but one skinny rabbit. It's not much, but it will have to do. So the man and his dogs went home. The man cooked up the rabbit. He ate most of it. He gave some of the scraps to his dogs, and then he put his dogs back outside to sleep. But the man was tired enough to go to sleep, but he was feeling much too hungry to go to bed. So instead of going over to his bed, he went to his high-back rocking chair, and he started in rocking. Oh, he rocked and he rocked, and he dozed off the way folks do when they're rocking in a rocking chair. Then he heard something rattling the pots and pans in the kitchen part of his cabin, and he looked, and there was a real hairy creature over there with a long, hairy tail. Oh, the man was still hungry, so he grabbed his axe, he went after that creature, he brought that axe down, but all he managed to do was cut off that long, hairy tail, and the rest of that creature got back outside through the cracks in the wall he'd come in by. The man took old newspapers, stuffed up those cracks, and then, 'cause he was still hungry, he took that long, hairy tail, he cooked it, and then he ate it. After that, he didn't feel hungry anymore, and he went on over to his bed, and pretty soon he was fast asleep. Now, he slept a good long while, but then he heard a noise. It was just sort of a scratch, scratch, scratch. Kind of like the sound a cat might make, just scratch, scratch, scratch. And it seemed to be coming from up on the roof of his house, just scratch, scratch, scratch. And then he heard a voice. Taily Poe, Taily Poe, I'm coming to get my Taily Poe. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The man sat up in his bed, and he said, I don't even know who you are or what you are, and why do you come around here bothering decent folks in the middle of the night? Just go away and then leave me alone. And the voice said, Taily Poe, Taily Poe, all I want is my Taily Poe. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Well, I haven't got your Taily Poe. I don't even know what you're talking about. Just go away from here. And the voice said, oh, you know, and I know that you ate my Taily Poe, and I want it back. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Oh, the man knew what to do. He got out of bed, went over to the door of his cabin, opened it just a crack, and he called for those dogs. Who know? I know. Crumpety-co, calico. Here, dogs, here, dogs. The dogs came barking and yelping out from underneath that porch, and the man said, sick it, dogs, get it, dogs. He went back inside, and he could hear those dogs barking and yelping at whatever that was on the roof. He could hear whatever that was on the roof just skittering down off, and he could hear his dogs chasing it away down off across the yard. The man got back in his bed. He fell asleep, too. And he slept for a good long while. But then he heard another noise. Now, at first, he thought he was just hearing wind whistling through trees down the swamp near his house. But then he stayed still, and he listened close. And he could hear a voice saying, Taily Poe, Taily Poe, I'm coming to get my Taily Poe. Oh, the man knew what to do. He got out of bed, went over to the door of his cabin, opened it just a crack, and yelled for those dogs. Who know? I know. Crumpety-co, calico. Here, dogs, here, dogs. The dogs never answered. And by the light of the moon, the man could see where his dogs had broken through the fence chasing whatever it was away. And the man knew whatever it was had led his dogs off into the swamp and had lost them. The man got back in his bed, and it took him a real long time, but he did manage to fall asleep. And he slept well, too, until he woke up with that feeling that you have when you know there's someone or something there in the room with you that is not supposed to be there. And right down at the foot of his bed, he heard scratch, scratch, scratch. And hairy-looking ears appeared, and he heard scratch, scratch, scratch. And fiery-looking yellow eyes appeared. Well, the man was so scared, he pulled his covers right up over his head, and then he heard and felt walking right on his covers, scratch, 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 scratch. And then a voice right up near his ear said, you know, and I know that you ate my Taily Poe, and I want it back. The man said, oh, I didn't eat your Taily Poe. I didn't eat your Taily Poe. Oh, yes, you did. Yes, you did. And it scratched and 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 scratched, 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 scratched. So today, they say all that is left of that man and his cabin there in that North Carolina woods are a few rocks that were once part of the foundation, and a big pile of rocks that were once part of the chimney. And I've been told that if any of us would be standing in that part of North Carolina at night, oh, we'd be likely to hear a sound blowing in from that swamp. First, we might think it was just wind whistling through trees. But if we'd stand still and listen close, we would hear a voice saying, "Taily Poe, Taily Poe, now I've got my Taily Poe." Is there, by chance, anybody here, any adult, any child, anyone in the room who would like for me to tell you how you can be certain that what happened to the man will never, ever happen to you? All right. I'll tell you. Listen closely. If you want to be sure that what happened to that man never, ever happens to you, this is the only thing you need to remember. Ready? Do not eat long, hairy tails. That's it. Don't do that. If you never eat a long, hairy tail, nothing is ever going to try to come after you to get its long, hairy tail back. Now, I know that some of you have been through the haunted house, some of you haven't been through the haunted house, and you may need a little bit of additional protection for other stories. So, I'll tell you another little quick superstition so that you will know you're well protected from anything else you might see out there. It's a little known fact that scary things have what is called a counting compulsion. Now, a compulsion is different from wanting to do something. You know that feeling, you want something, it's a very strong feeling. A compulsion means that if it can be done, you have no choice, you must do it. Scary things have what is called a counting compulsion. That means if something is in front of them that can be counted, they have no choice, they must count it. So let me ask you this. Who all here has window screens on their windows at home? That's about half of you. I'm worried about the other half. Well, those of you with the window screens on your windows at home, picture this. Scary thing comes up looking for you, sees one of those window screens. Now, I've never counted them, but there are a tremendous number of holes in one of those window screens. Scary things with that counting compulsion have no choice. They must count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And, of course, they don't even get partway through one window screen before daylight comes. And when daylight comes, all such scary things have to go away. So now you have 2 sets of protection. Don't eat any long, hairy tails. And for all the other stories, just put up a window screen. And if you don't have any of those, get a sieve, a tea strainer, something with a lot of holes in it, and just hang it over the doorknob. Set up something that'll make those things with the counting compulsion have to stop and count. I'm sure you've all heard of Jack. Jack's the hero of a whole lot of stories. Who all's heard about that time he climbed a beanstalk? Yeah, and brought down that musical harp. That's what I figured. Most people have heard about that. And that's one of those things that Jack did when he was a boy. But there are other adventures about Jack as a boy, but Jack grew up. And I don't know what happened to the harp and the hen that laid the golden eggs and all that kind of stuff, because in this story about Jack, he's grown. He's married. He and his wife have children, and they've got no money. Jack had no job. There were no jobs to be had. Jack looked for jobs all around where he lived. He looked for jobs in the neighboring settlements. there were no jobs to be had. Oh, Jack and his wife and children, they had a little garden, and they would grow the food they needed, most of it anyway, in that garden, but still there were some things that just plain old took money. And so finally, Jack and his wife came to a decision. And the decision was that Jack should leave. Not forever, hopefully not for long, but that Jack should leave. He should travel as long as it took to find a job. And he should work that job and do his best to send money home for his wife and his children so that they could have those things that you needed and only money could provide. So when the day for the leaving came, Jack and his wife and his children all hugged each other and said their goodbyes, and Jack left. Now he walked because that's how people traveled in those days, and it took him many days of walking to get beyond that area where he'd already been searching for jobs. And as he kept on walking out there looking and looking for a job, he came to a town, and there on the edge of the town where they often stood was a mill. And Jack noticed that this mill was not operating. He thought, I've been passing a lot of farmlands. People around here growing corn, they'll want their corn ground into cornmeal. People growing wheat, they'll want the wheat ground into flour. And I wonder why they don't have an operating mill. And Jack got to asking around. He learned that town was in need of a miller. He asked around some more, learned who the man was who owned that mill. Jack went to see him. And the man said, "Oh, well, sure enough, I would indeed like to hire somebody to be a miller for me. I'll pay you for it. You also get to keep a portion of everything you grind. I'll provide you with a place to stay, and I'll give you some meat to eat, some rations, some food, and you'll be able to send some money home for your wife and your children. I believe this could work out pretty well." Jack said, "That's wonderful. Show me the mill." So the two of them went down, and they looked that mill over. The owner showed Jack how he was to turn the water from the stream into the mill race so that great big wheel would turn, so that inside that mill the grindstones would be turned and grinding people's wheat to flour and corn to cornmeal. And Jack was excited. He knew he'd be able to do this job. And then the mill owner took Jack into a room and said, "Now, this is where the miller gets to stay." Oh, Jack looked around that room. Why, it had a fireplace, and there was a skillet there. It was going to be Jack's own skillet to use. The man brought him some food and brought him some flour. Jack was going to have his own store of meal. He was going to have his own meat to eat. It's going to work out real well. And Jack looked around that room, and it had real tall ceilings, and there were windows up around that room, about 12 of them. And Jack thought, "Oh, I bet the moonlight comes in here real pretty at night. This is going to be wonderful." And Jack agreed to take that job. Well, just about then, the mill owner said, "Jack, one more thing I need to tell you before you agree to this job. You see, I had hired many people on as the miller. Every single one of them's worked one day. They spent one night in this room. Jack, when I've come to get them the next morning, I've been finding them dead. And I just think you ought to know that before you agree to take on the job." Jack said, "Well, yeah, I appreciate you telling me, but, I need this job, so I believe it'll be all right." And so Jack set to work. And as soon as people around that community heard that the mill was operating, they couldn't get there fast enough. They were all coming. Jack was busy. He was busy all day that day. He was busy way up till it got dark. And he had just managed to shut down the mill, get the water turned out of the mill race back into the stream, about to go into that room, fix himself something to eat, when a real old fella rode up, riding an even older mule. And that old fella had a little old tiny sack of corn with him and said, "Jack." The old fella knew Jack's name. "Jack, I'd be much obliged if you'd take this sack of corn here and grind it into meal for me." And Jack said, "Oh, it's my job. I'd be happy to. It's going to take me a little while. Got to get the mill running again. As soon as I get that done, I'll be happy to grind it." And Jack went to work. He ground that fella's little sack of corn, gave that fella his meal, and that fella said, "Jack, I'm really grateful that you did this grinding for me. Why, you're the first ones treated me right here at this mill. It takes me a long time to get here. My mule is old, I'm old. We live way far out. It just takes a real long time. And Jack, I sure do appreciate you treating me right. I want to give you a present. And the old fellow reached under his coat, and he came out with a knife, and Jack said, oh, and the old fellow said, no, Jack, it's a present. I'm going to hand it to you handle first, Jack. Take it. And Jack took that knife, and it was a real fine silver knife. And Jack said, oh, I was just doing my job. I don't need to have a present. I was just doing my job. And the old fellow said, oh, no, Jack. I appreciate what you did for me. Now you just take this. And so Jack said, all right. And he put that knife away, said bye to that fella, and then he went on into that room where he was going to get to stay and started using that silver knife to slice meat. And he got a fire going in that fireplace, and he was looking forward to the sizzling of that meat in his skillet. And the moonlight was coming in those windows. He said, oh, this is going to be a wonderful job. I'm really going to like this. And Jack had just dropped that meat in the skillet and set the skillet on the fire when the moonlight coming in the windows disappeared. Jack looked. He saw the reason for it. Cats. Big cats. One of them sitting in each one of those windows. Jack just pretended he hadn't seen them, and he went on working with that meat of his. And then he heard a real soft little thump-thump. And a tiny bit of moonlight came back, and Jack looked, and the biggest of those cats was sitting right down there beside him. The others were still up in the windows. Jack just went on working with his meat, pretending he hadn't seen that cat. Then that biggest cat came over there toward Jack, looked at Jack, looked at his skillet of meat, stuck out its paw, and said, "Stop, dog." Jack said, "You stop your paw on my meat, I'll cut it off." The cat pulled its paw back. Jack went on working with meat. And again, that cat stuck out its paw. "Stop, dog." Jack said, "I'm telling you, you stop your paw on my gravy, I'll cut it off." Cat pulled its paw back. Jack went on working. The other cats, well, they were getting kind of restless. A little bit of from the windows. And that cat looked at Jack, looked at that skillet, went, "Stop down!" Put its paw right in Jack's gravy. Oh, Jack took that knife and wham, he cut that cat's paw off. And meow! All those cats jumped out of those windows, and the moonlight came back in. Well, Jack, he looked a bit, saw they were gone, and then he turned back to his skillet, expecting to find a cat's paw. And instead, there was a woman's hand with a pretty ring on it. Jack said, "Oh, now I see the way of it. Now I believe I know what's happened to those other millers. Why, those weren't cats. Those were witches. And this must be their meeting place. Oh, I'm just lucky. I'm lucky that fella gave me that silver knife, because silver's one of the few things that can hurt a witch. Oh, I'm just real lucky I had that silver knife. Oh, I better save this hand, show it to the mill owner." Jack took some paper. He fished that hand out of that skillet, and he wrapped it up in paper and set it over on the mantel. Then he took that skillet out. He dumped that meat out. He scoured that skillet out with dirt and sand real well, little rocks and stuff. And while he was kind of shaken up, he decided he wanted him going to cook in it that night, just in case the poison might still be there. And so Jack went to bed real hungry. And the next morning, the mill owner came down to the mill, walked in that room where Jack was sleeping, and Jack heard him and looked over and said, "Oh, it's you." The mill owner said, "Oh, Jack, you have no idea how pleased I am to see you there smiling at me. I was just sure I was going to have to come down here and arrange another funeral. I've been having to do that every time I hire a miller." And Jack said, "Well, you might not have to do it for me. Tell you what I think's happened to your others, though." And told the mill owner what had happened. And then Jack added, "I saved that hand for you. Would you like to see it?" "Oh, I surely would." And Jack got that paper and handed that mill owner that hand. And that mill owner looked at the hand. He said, "No. Oh, no, Jack. Jack, I know this hand. Why, but this is my wife's hand. And this morning, she said she couldn't get out of bed. Said she was feeling poorly. Oh, now I know the why of it, Jack. And she's got some women friends that she's been seeing a whole lot, going out in the evenings with a whole lot. And I suspected some of them are doing some witching, Jack. But I never allowed house. My wife might be the lead witch. Oh, Jack, I know it's her hand. I give her the ring. There's no question about it." And Jack said, "All right. You know what we have to do? I'll help you." And so Jack and the mill owner went up to the mill owner's house. And the mill owner went inside, and his wife was still over there in the bed. And he went over and he said, "Well, honey, you feeling any better?" And she said, No, I feel real poorly today. I just don't feel well at all." And the mill owner said, "Well, honey, would you like for me to send for some of your women friends, come sit with you?" "Oh, yes," she said. And she named off the names of a whole lot of other women in that community. The mill owner went out, gave those names to Jack, and Jack sent for the other women. And while that was happening, the mill owner went back inside, and he said to his wife, Honey, here, let me hold your hand, keep you company." "All right," she said, and she stuck out a hand. And he held it for a while. And then he said, "Now, honey, let me hold your other hand." "Oh, no," she said, "it's fine." He said, "Oh, come on now, honey, I want to see your other hand." "Oh, no." She said, "Now, honey, I want to see your other hand." And she took her hand under the covers and kind of wiggled around a bunch, twisted around a bunch, and then she stuck that same hand out again, just kind of twisted up a bit. He said, "Honey, that's your same hand. I want the other hand." And he reached under the covers and grabbed her arm out, and there was no hand, just a bloody stub. And by then, all those other women were arriving. And they let them all go on in the house. And Jack and the mill owner, well, they did what folks believed had to be done if witching was discovered in those days. They took brush, they piled it all around that house, put extra up against the door, and extra under all the windows. Then they set fire to it all. And they stood there watching the windows, making sure no cat-like creatures would go out, and they watched it burn. And they heard the psing and the popping and the all burning cats, and they were so busy watching the windows and the door that I reckon they didn't see that when the smoke rose from that fire, while it just all gathered itself up in the air, and for just a moment, it shaped itself like one huge cat, and then it drifted on off. And that's the story of how Jack sort of helped one community get rid of its witching for at least a while. That's Sopdog. 1861. It was a year of massive importance for the United States of America. For as I'm sure you recall from history, 1861 was the year that this country split in two, and the North and the South went to war against each other. Now, in southwest Indiana, there were many young men who, like young men on both the North and the South, said, "Hey, this war is going to be over in 3 months. The whole shooting match finished in 3 months. I'm leaving now, or I'll miss my chance." There were many who thought that. But in southwest Indiana, there was a young man named Cyrus Humphrey. Cyrus didn't want to go. The others came to him and said, "Cyrus, come on, we're going to join up." He said, I can't. I made a promise to Maggie, and I intend to keep my promise." Now, Maggie was Margaret Jones. Margaret Jones was a farmer's daughter who lived on the farm that adjoined the farm where Cyrus Humphrey had grown up. And Cyrus and Maggie, why, they planned to be married in the summer of 1861. That was the promise he made, and he stayed to keep it. Well, the other young men went off,
And Cyrus and Maggie married. And by summer's end, why, those friends of Cyrus, they were part of the 24th Indiana Regiment. And by September, they were headed south to fight in the war. Well, by the time the summer had ended, Maggie and Cyrus, they had their own news they were concerned about, for Maggie was expecting a baby. And they decided that their marriage had indeed gotten off to a fine start. They were living in a small farmhouse on land that was a farm all their own, put together from land given by his family and land given by hers. And in the winter of 61, 62, Cyrus made a cradle for that baby, and Maggie, she wove coverlets to keep that baby warm. And news came of the war now and then. Well, all those folks who had thought it was only going to take 3 months, they started saying, why, it'll be over by Christmas. And then Christmas came and went. And they started saying, why, surely by the end of 62, it'll be over. Maggie wasn't sure. She had a feeling that winter that Cyrus was probably going to need to join that war. And so, while she prepared for the baby, she also knitted socks, wool socks, because she knew if he became a soldier, he was going to need them. Well, in April of 62, word came to Indiana of a battle at a place in Tennessee called Shiloh. Thousands had been killed on both sides in just 2 days. Cyrus's friends from the 24th Indiana Regiment, they were there at Shiloh, but they got there on the second day, April 7th, and so they weren't as badly hurt as the Union troops who had been there on the first day. But as word came back, Cyrus said, Maggie, this war's going to take everybody. I'm going to have to go. But Maggie, I promise you I won't leave until I finish the planting, and I won't leave until our baby comes into the world. Well, the baby was born in early summer. And after that baby was born, Cyrus said, well, Maggie, I've kept my promise. The baby's here. The planting's done. And when harvest time comes, why, you can get one of your younger brothers. I've already talked to them. They said they'll come over and they'll help you. My family's nearby. Your family's nearby. You and the baby will be all right, Maggie. But Maggie, I promise you, if anything happens to me, Maggie, why, I'll make sure you get my wedding ring. And I'm going to wear it because I want to be able to look at it so I can take comfort in knowing that you and our child are here. But Maggie, I'll let the others that I serve with know that I want this ring to find its way back to you. Well, she looked at him and she said, Cyrus Humphrey, the only way I want that ring back is on your hand with you bringing it through the door. I'll do my best, Maggie, he said. And he left. Well, by September, Cyrus was a member of the 80th Indiana Regiment, and he was on his way south to meet up with General Bragg's army that had come up from the south and invaded Kentucky. Maggie and her brothers brought in the harvest. They had it all in by early October. And on the evening of October 8th, Maggie sat on her porch, and she looked at the baby in the cradle, and she looked at the dogs, and she looked at her wedding ring and just sort of twisted it on her finger and hoped that Cyrus was able to take as much comfort from his ring as she did from hers. Well, evening was coming on, and so Maggie moved on off the porch inside, and she fixed a little supper and sat down at the table to eat. And it was then that she heard the dogs. They were outside, and they were barking with each other. Sounded like they were in a fight with each other. Those two dogs, they'd been together since pups, and they scrapped a little bit. This sounded like a real fight. Well, she lit a lantern, and she carried it outside, and the dogs, they were fighting over something. She had to kick at them to get them to leave it alone and move back. And by the light of the lantern, she could see that they had been fighting over a hand. She set down the lantern and she picked up that hand, and she noticed it had a ring on it. She worked the ring from a finger, and then she set the hand up in a notch of a tree where the dogs couldn't get at it. And then she picked up the lantern and went back inside. She sat at her supper table, and she examined the ring, and then she began to weep. For inside the ring were engraved the initials, M.H., C.H., for Margaret Humphrey, Cyrus Humphrey. And she knew that this was indeed Cyrus's ring. Well, in the morning, the hand was gone from the notch in the tree. And it was some time later when Maggie learned that Cyrus was among the first killed in the 80th Indiana Regiment when they met their first battle, the Battle of Perryville in Kentucky. There were those who were mystified that the ring had come to Maggie, but Maggie was surprised, but not completely, for she knew she had married Cyrus Humphrey, a man who above all kept his promises. A long time ago, the only light anybody could expect to have traveling home late at night was moonlight. And on the night this story takes place, there was no moon. But there was a fellow who had been away from home well into the night. And as he was traveling home on that dark, dark night, he said to himself, "Well, I believe I'll take a shortcut through the town cemetery." And that's what he did. Started walking right through that town cemetery when all of a sudden, boom, he fell into a newly dug grave. Well, now he did what just about any of us would do. He tried to get out. He would jump up and get a little finger hold, and he'd fall back down in there. And he would jump up and get a finger hold again, and he'd slip back down, and a little dirt would tumble down in on him. And he'd jump up again and get a finger hold, and he did that over and over and over until he was just about exhausted. And then he said to himself, "It's all right. It's all right. I'll spend the night here. I'll be okay. I don't have to get myself out. People don't dig graves for no reason at all. Tomorrow there must be a funeral planned, and after the funeral there'll be a burying, and people will come here to the cemetery, and they'll find me. And then they can get a ladder, and they'll get me out." And he calmed himself, and then he felt his way down to one end of that grave, thinking all the while, this is just where I'll need to spend the night. That's all. I'll just need to spend the night here. And when he got down to the end of that grave, why, he just kind of sank down there in the corner, and he curled in on himself as best he could just to keep warm. And pretty soon he did feel warm, and he fell fast asleep. Later that same night, there was another fella headed home in the dark. And that second fella, why, he made the same decision as that first fella. He said, "I believe I'll take a shortcut through the town cemetery." And there he was, walking along through the cemetery when, as fate or luck would have it, he fell right down into the very same newly dug grave. Now, he started out same as that first fella. He tried to jump out. He'd leap up and get a little finger hold, and he'd fall back down in there. And he'd leap up and get a finger hold, and he'd fall back down. But then he took to hollering, "Help, help, help! I fall in a grave, help! Somebody come get me out! Help, 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 help!" He made such a racket, he woke up that fella who was asleep down there in the end of that grave. And when that sleeping fella woke up, he looked over in the direction of all that racket, and he said, "There is no sense in you yelling and carrying on like that. You can't get out." He was wrong. 'Cause when that fellow who was hollering heard a voice, he gave one jump, and he was out of that grave on his way home. And I understand he was moving pretty fast, too. Thanks for listening to the stories. I hope you have fun at the haunted house.